The first sensation to penetrate his awareness was the pervasive cold, not the invigorating, sterile chill of an overzealous climate control system, but a clammy, insidious cold that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the earth. Elias Vance forced his eyes open, a process akin to peeling aged adhesive tape from a dust-laden surface. A dull, persistent ache reverberated through his head, a lingering echo of a vintage he couldn't summon to memory. The expanse above him was not the familiar, vaulted ceiling of his penthouse bedroom, adorned with its recessed starlight projection. Instead, it was a jaundiced, water-stained plain, a fractured landscape of despair. A solitary bare bulb hung precariously from a frayed cord, its filament emitting a feeble orange glow against the surrounding gloom. Panic, sharp and intense, pierced through him. He propelled himself upright, the sudden movement sending a wave of agony through his back. The bed, or rather, a lumpy mattress atop a creaking metal frame, protested with a groan. The sheets felt coarse against his skin, carrying a faint odor of mildew and the perspiration of another. He glanced down at his hands. They were undeniably his, recognizable by the elongated fingers of a man unaccustomed to manual labor, and the faint scar on his left thumb from a childhood fencing mishap. However, they were soiled. Grime was ingrained within the lines of his knuckles, and his nails were jagged and darkened. He was clad in a threadbare t-shirt, its faded logo for an unfamiliar band peeling away like sunburnt epidermis. Elias? The voice lacked the melodic, refined cadence of his wife, Helena. This voice was harsher, imbued with a chronic weariness. He turned his head. A woman occupied a small, rickety table in the corner of the confined room. She appeared gaunt, with dark circles beneath her eyes that hinted at sleepless nights and unending worry. In her lap, a young boy no more than 5 years old was absently pushing a piece of dry toast around on a chipped plate. They were strangers, utter strangers, confined within the intimate space of a bedroom that was not his own. Who are you?" Elias's voice emerged as a dry rasp. "Where am I? Where is my wife?" The woman's brow furrowed in an expression of genuine concern, a look that unsettled him more than any overt threat. "Leo, are you all right? You were tossing and turning all night long. You said you had another nightmare." She gestured around the squalid room. "You're home. I'm here. Finn's here." Leo. The name struck him like a physical blow. He scrambled off the mattress, his bare feet recoiling from the splintered, icy floorboards. Spotting a fragment of a mirror suspended from a nail on the wall, he lurched toward it. The face reflected back was his own, yet disturbingly altered. It was indeed Elias Vance, 42 years of age, founder of the global tech behemoth Aura. The same prominent cheekbones, the same defined jawline, the same penetrating gray eyes. However, this iteration of him was emaciated, his complexion sallow. Novel lines of exhaustion were etched around his eyes, and a 2-day stubble cast a shadow upon a jaw that was typically impeccably clean-shaven. He appeared defeated. He resembled one of the countless faces he would encounter in the lower districts, a face he was conditioned to disregard, to perceive as part of the city's unfortunate yet necessary backdrop. "No," he whispered, touching his own unfamiliar reflection. "No, this is wrong. This is all wrong." He spun around, his mind a tempest of confusion and terror. The room was a prison cell of destitution. A single window revealed a grimy brick wall mere inches away. The atmosphere was heavy with the stench of boiled cabbage and dampness. This was no mere prank. It was not a simple kidnapping. This felt fundamental, as if the very fabric of the universe had been rewoven around him. "I need to make a call," he stated, his voice recovering a sliver of its former authority. "My phone. Where is my phone?" The woman, who had addressed him as Leo, indicated a battered, plastic-cased device charging on the floor. It was an antiquated model, a relic his own company had rendered obsolete a decade prior. He snatched it up, his fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar interface. He was unable to recall the passcode. He didn't recognize any of the numbers within the contacts. Foreman Graves. Mama. Pawnbroker. His heart pounded against his ribs. He hurled the phone down and lunged for the door, wrenching it open. He found himself in a narrow, dimly lit hallway that reeked of urine and decay. Doors identical to his lined the passage, a chorus of muffled coughs and arguments emanating from behind them. This was a tenement building, a slum. He stumbled down a flight of rickety stairs and burst out onto the street. The world that greeted him was a nightmarish tableau painted in hues of grey and brown. The sky was a sheet of lead, suffocated by the perpetual smog of the industrial sector. Towering skeletal structures, the infamous stacks, obscured the sun, housing tens of thousands in vertical squalor. The air was a toxic cocktail of factory emissions and decay. People shuffled past him, their faces hollow, their bodies hunched. They were the underclass, the dregs of the economic machine he had played a role in constructing, and they all wore the same expression of weary resignation he had just witnessed in his own reflection. He needed to reach his tower, Vance Tower, the gleaming spire of chrome and glass that pierced the heavens in the city's core, a testament to his achievements. It was situated miles away, in what felt like a different galaxy. He commenced running, his bare feet protesting vehemently against the broken pavement and gritty streets. He ran with the frantic desperation of a man attempting to outpace his own shadow. After what seemed like an eternity, gasping for breath in the polluted atmosphere, he arrived at the periphery of the financial district. And there, he beheld it. A colossal public view screen, affixed to the side of a building, was broadcasting the morning news. The anchorwoman, with her flawless smile and synthetic cheerfulness, was speaking. And in corporate news, visionary CEO Elias Vance of Aura announced a groundbreaking new philanthropic initiative today. The Empathy Mandate, as he calls it, a program designed to bridge the divide between the city's sectors. Speaking from his breathtaking penthouse this morning, Vance, alongside his beautiful wife Helena, pledged to personally oversee the project. The camera zoomed in on a man standing on a balcony that Elias knew better than his own pulse. It was his balcony. And standing there, waving to the cameras, was a man with his face. No, not precisely his face. It was a different man, broader, with coarser features and calloused-looking hands. But he was wearing Elias's custom-tailored suit. And beside him, smiling radiantly, was his wife, Helena. Except it wasn't Helena. It was the exhausted, worn-out woman from the tenement apartment. She was transformed, adorned in an elegant silk gown, her hair meticulously styled, her face radiating with a vitality he couldn't fathom. The young boy, Finn, stood between them, now dressed in expensive attire, appearing content and healthy. The world lurched on its axis. Elias collapsed to his knees on the grimy sidewalk, the jeers of passers-by fading into a muffled roar. He was witnessing his life being lived by another. He was a specter, trapped on the wrong side of reality. He hadn't been kidnapped. He wasn't merely dreaming. He had been replaced. An exchange had transpired. A soul for a soul. He gazed down at his own trembling, dirt-encrusted hands, then back at the screen where the man who had usurped his life was being hailed as a benefactor. This wasn't simply a loss of affluence. It was a loss of self, an obliteration. He was inconsequential. And as the broadcast continued, extolling the virtues of the new, compassionate Elias Vance, a singular, terrifying question began to materialize within the ruins of his mind. If that man was him, then who or what had he now become? The ensuing days served as a harsh education in the physics of a world inverted. The initial shock had solidified into a frigid, unyielding knot of apprehension in Elias's gut, a constant companion in this novel, oppressive reality. He discovered that his new name was Leo Kolchak. He learned that the weary woman was his wife, Maya, and the boy was his son, Finn. He learned that he toiled a 12-hour shift at the Amalgamated Metalworks, Sector 7, a monstrous, smoke-spewing behemoth of a factory that constituted the dark heart of this district. These were not facts he embraced, but rather blows he endured. Each morning Maya would rouse him with a gentle nudge, her eyes filled with a tired tenderness that felt like a judgment. He was a phantom within this family, an imposter in the body of a man he did not recognize, and their quiet acceptance of him was the most infuriating aspect of all. His first day at the factory was a descent into a Dantean inferno. From the moment he stepped through the gates, the sheer volume of the place assaulted his senses. A deafening symphony of screeching metal, the volcanic hiss of hydraulics, and the rhythmic, earth-shaking thud of industrial presses. The air was thick with the taste of ozone and hot iron, a metallic dust that coated his tongue and irritated his lungs. Men and women, their faces smeared with grease and perspiration, moved like phantoms within the machine, their movements economical and weary. They were mere cogs, and Leo, was now one of them. He was assigned to the scrap line, a conveyor belt that transported a ceaseless river of discarded metal, twisted girders, sheared pipes, the metallic skeletons of obsolete machines. His task, as explained by a grizzled foreman named Graves, was to separate the copper from the steel, the aluminum from the iron, using only his bare hands. The metal was often sharp, and within the first hour his soft, uncalloused hands were crisscrossed with bleeding cuts. The pain was acute, but it was the humiliation that burned even more intensely. He, Elias Vance, who had once reshaped global markets with a single command, was now reduced to a scavenger, sifting through the refuse of the very world he had constructed. It was here, amidst the grime and the clamor, that he first truly encountered the novel laws of this inverted society. During the midday break, the workers were herded into a bleak canteen. A meager soup of nutrient paste was poured into bowls. Before anyone could partake, a screen on the wall sprang to life, displaying the visage of the man now bearing his name, the newly christened Elias Vance, an imposter in every sense of the word. "A message from our benefactor," Foreman Graves boomed, his voice cutting through the murmuring throng. The imposter's countenance dominated the screen. He addressed the assembly with a homespun, artless charisma that Elias found utterly distasteful. "Friends, workers, brothers and sisters of this city," he began, his tone earnest. "I recall vividly what it is like. The gnawing hunger in your stomach, the throbbing ache in your back, these are not forgotten. It is for this very reason that we have the empathy mandate." He proceeded to elucidate the system, explaining how a substantial fraction of corporate earnings, his earnings, were being channeled into social welfare initiatives, public housing projects, and enhanced worker benefits. However, this largesse came at a cost. This was not altruism. It was a calculated transaction. The price demanded was gratitude. "Your productivity serves as a direct measure of your appreciation," the imposter declared, his smile unwavering. "Each piece of metal you categorize, every gear you set in motion, is a thank you to the society that now provides for your well-being. We meticulously monitor this. We reward it accordingly. Those who exhibit the greatest levels of gratitude will be elevated in status. Those who do not, well, we must all contribute our fair share to the new harmony. Following the broadcast, Graves patrolled the tables, wielding a handheld scanner. This was a gratitude audit in progress. He scanned a microchip implanted in each worker's wrist, a chip Elias discovered he now possessed. A numerical value flashed on the screen. Graves would either nod in approval or grunt in disapproval. "Kolchak," he bellowed, halting at Elias's table. He scanned Elias's wrist. The reading was woefully deficient. Graves sneered with contempt. "Daydreaming once more, Leo? Your gratitude quotient is pathetic. Bear in mind what the benefactor has stated. A lazy hand betrays an ungrateful heart. Ungrateful hearts forfeit priority access to medical provisions or housing improvements. Elevate your numbers, or you will drag your entire family down with you." The threat hung heavy in the air. This was not a meritocracy predicated on skill or intellect. It was a tyranny founded upon enforced emotion. The newly affluent, the erstwhile impoverished, had not dismantled the system of control. They had merely rebranded it. Rather than being crushed by an indifferent capitalist structure, the workers were now being suffocated by a demand for performative thankfulness. It was a more insidious form of imprisonment, one in which one's very feelings were subject to scrutiny and evaluation. This empathy mandate was a masterful stroke of psychological manipulation, and Elias felt a revolting, grudging respect for the twisted genius who conceived it. It was precisely the type of elegant, terrifying system he himself might have engineered. That evening, he returned to the tenement, his body a unified chorus of pain. His hands were lacerated, his back felt fractured. Maya was awaiting his arrival. She offered no comment on his condition, but tenderly took his hands and began to cleanse the cuts with a rag soaked in a weak antiseptic that stung like fire. Her touch was methodical, practiced, betraying long experience with such injuries. "You must exercise greater caution, Leo," she murmured softly, her gaze fixed on his wounds. "The foreman is capable of docking your pay for injuries. He will claim you were negligent, that you are damaging company assets." "Company assets," Elias scoffed, his tone laced with bitterness. "We are not assets. We are the fuel. We are being consumed to keep their new, comfortable world warm." Maya looked up, and for a fleeting moment he glimpsed a flicker of something profound in her eyes. Not surprise, but a deep, resonant sadness. "Fuel is exhaustible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We must endure, for Finn's sake." The boy. Finn served as the anchor that moored this bizarre new existence to a semblance of reality. He was a quiet child, possessing large, observant eyes that seemed to penetrate Elias's facade. That night, Finn was seized by a coughing fit, a dry, rattling sound that shook his small frame. Maya cradled him, rocking him gently, her face a mask of helpless fear. "It is the dust from the works," she explained to Elias, her voice strained with worry. "The air here, it permeates their lungs. The clinic has medicine available, but our gratitude rating is currently too low this month. We are relegated to the waiting list." The word struck Elias with the force of a physical blow. A child was ill, and his access to treatment hinged upon a computer algorithm measuring his father's, or rather the man who was impersonating his father's, factory performance. In his former life, he could have acquired the entire pharmaceutical conglomerate with a single telephone call. Now he could not even procure basic medicine for a suffering child. The sheer, staggering injustice of it all ignited a rage within him, a fire that consumed some of the fog of his despair. This was no longer solely about him. He remained awake long after Maya and Finn had succumbed to a fitful sleep, the boy's raspy breaths filling the cramped room. He stared at the cracked ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts. He had been so consumed by what he had forfeited, his name, his wealth, his very identity. Yet he now perceived the obverse of the coin, what he had gained. He had obtained a first-hand perspective of the monstrous machine he had once presided over. He had witnessed the human toll exacted by the figures on his balance sheets. The externalities his board members had casually dismissed were now the very air he inhaled, the lacerations on his hands, the ailment plaguing a child's lungs. The great inversion had not merely stolen his life. It had thrust him directly into the consequences of that life. He pondered the impostor, the new Elias Vance, speaking of empathy from the sterile comfort of his, Elias's, penthouse. Did he truly remember? Did he recall this cold, this damp, this pervasive fear? Or had the comfort and the power already begun to obliterate the memory, like a rising tide erasing footprints in the sand? He ran a hand across his face, the rough stubble a constant reminder of his new station. He had to take action. He could not merely subsist here. He had to retaliate. But how? He was but one man, stripped of every tool he had ever known. He was a ghost, a non-entity. As his fingers traced the unfamiliar lines on his face, they brushed against a small, hard object nestled in the pocket of the grimy trousers he had been given. He retrieved it. It was a small, smooth river stone, upon whose surface was carved a simple, elegant symbol, a spiral, interwoven with a straight line. He recognized it instantly. It was the logo of his first, failed startup venture, a company he had founded during his college years, a symbol of his youthful ambition. He had kept a paperweight bearing that design on his desk for a span of 20 years. What was it doing here, in the pocket of a destitute factory worker named Leo Kolchak? It defied all logic. It was a fragment of himself, a piece of his authentic past, stranded here in this nightmarish present. Had he placed it there himself, during a moment he could not recollect? Or had someone else surreptitiously placed it there? A cold chill coursed down his spine, a sensation entirely distinct from the ever-present cold of the room. It was the chill of a dawning, terrifying possibility. What if he was not the only one who retained his memories? The small, carved stone became his talisman, a secret anchor in the churning sea of his new existence. He would turn it over and over in his pocket during the grueling hours on the scrap line, the smooth, cool surface providing a tangible link to a self that felt increasingly like a dream. The symbol, that intertwined spiral and line, was a specter from his own history, a private joke that had once represented the chaotic dance of creativity and the linear path of business. Here, in this world of brute force and grim survival, it felt like a message from another dimension. Its presence hinted at a crack in the flawless facade of the inversion, a suggestion that memory, true memory, was not so easily expunged. His internal world became a battleground. During the daylight hours, he was Leo Kolchak, a machine composed of flesh and bone, his mind dulled by exhaustion and the rhythmic clang of the factory machinery. He learned to anticipate the lurch of the conveyor belt, the specific weight differential between copper and steel. He learned to maintain a low profile during the gratitude audits, focusing his thoughts on a singular burning point of anger to prevent any despair from registering on the foreman's scanner. He was mastering the art of invisibility, the survival instinct of the prey. However, at night, within the suffocating stillness of the tenement, Elias Vance would claw his way back to consciousness. Sleep offered no solace, only a different form of torture. He did not merely dream of his former life. He relived it in excruciating, high-definition detail. He would stand on the balcony of his penthouse, the city lights forming a glittering carpet beneath his feet, the taste of a 25-year-old single malt scotch lingering on his tongue. He would feel the cool, supple leather of his limousine's interior, the silent hum of its engine a lullaby of power. He would see his true wife Helena, not the transfigured, beatific Madonna depicted on the news screen, but the real Helena, sharp, witty, ambitious, a partner in his empire. He recalled their arguments, their laughter, their quiet, shared ambition. These were not merely memories of luxury, they were memories of a life, a complex tapestry woven from love, struggle, and triumph. Awakening from these visions was a fresh bereavement each morning, the rough texture of the blanket and the smell of decay serving as a brutal confirmation of his exile. His greatest torment, however, was the specter of his son, Julian. In his former life, Julian was a 14-year-old boy confined within a gilded cage. Elias had furnished him with everything imaginable, the finest schools, the most advanced technology, a future secured by a mountain of wealth. But he had failed to give him his time. He recalled Julian attempting to share a piece of music he had composed, and Elias, distracted by a falling stock price, had dismissively waved him away. He remembered Julian's excitement over a school science project, an excitement that had withered under Elias's uninterested gaze. He had viewed his son as a legacy to be managed, an heir to be groomed, not a boy to be loved. Now that ghost served as his constant accuser. In the quiet moments, he would observe Finn, Maya's son. He observed how the boy's eyes illuminated whenever Maya reserved a small piece of fruit for him from her own paltry portion. He witnessed the fierce, protective affection in her gaze as she read to him from a time-worn picture book, her voice gentle and patient. He discerned a connection he had never succeeded in establishing with his own offspring. This nascent family, which he had initially perceived as a component of his confinement, now served as a mirror, reflecting his own profound inadequacies as both a father and a husband. One evening, Finn was seated on the floor, endeavoring to construct a diminutive tower from discarded bottle caps. The structure proved unstable, collapsing every few seconds. The boy's frustration mounted, his face contorting as he was on the verge of sweeping them away in anger. Elias, observing from his corner, experienced a peculiar impulse. He descended to the floor, the movement eliciting a protest from his aching joints. "You must construct a broader foundation," he stated, his voice more subdued than he had intended. "Like a pyramid. That is the most resilient shape." He procured several of the caps and arranged them into a firm base. Subsequently, he demonstrated to Finn how to construct the subsequent layer inward. The boy observed, his large, inquisitive eyes fixated on Elias's hands. Together they erected a small, stable tower. Finn gazed at the structure, then upward at Elias, and a small, infrequent smile graced his lips. Within that smile, Elias perceived a flicker of something he had not experienced in a considerable time. It was not authority, or triumph, or vanity. It was connection. A straightforward, unembellished human connection. However, the moment proved ephemeral. Maya, who had been observing from the doorway, wore a complex expression. It was not animosity, but a profound, sorrowful bewilderment. "You have been different, Leo," she expressed later that evening, after Finn was asleep. "Ever since that calamitous night, it is as if you are a stranger inhabiting his body." Elias's heart ceased its rhythm. He had been so engrossed in his own internal conflict that he had neglected the fact that he was an actor upon a stage, and his audience was observing intently. I am merely fatigued, Maya." "The factory." "No," she interjected, her voice scarcely audible. "It transcends that. The former Leo, he was a commendable man, but he was depleted. He had relinquished hope. He never would have played upon the floor with Finn. He never would have regarded the world with such anger, such astonishment. You observe everything as if you are perceiving it for the first time. Occasionally, when you gaze at me, it is as if you do not recognize who I am. He possessed no retort. He could not divulge the truth to her. The truth constituted an insanity that would shatter what little stability she possessed. He was a cuckoo within her nest, a spectre inhabiting her husband's form. The culpability was a palpable burden pressing down upon him. He was not only deprived of his own existence, he was appropriating someone else's. "I am sorry," was all he could muster. That night, slumber engendered a novel form of vision. It was not a recollection, but a synthesis, a fever dream born of his conflicting realities. He was within his former boardroom, the lengthy, polished mahogany table stretching before him. His board members were present, but their faces were the gaunt, grease-stained faces of the laborers from the scrap line. Foreman Graves stood where his vice president should have been, and at the head of the table in his chair sat Maya. She was neither the weary woman from the tenement, nor the refined wife of the benefactor. She was something intermediate, her eyes embodying both the weight of her former existence and the authority of her new one. "The figures are declining, Elias," she stated, her voice reverberating within the cavernous chamber. "Your empathy output is lagging. Your sorrow is unproductive. Your guilt demonstrates a meager return on investment. The system mandates gratitude, not grief. What is your proposition to rectify this?" He attempted to articulate, but no words emerged. He was paralyzed. He glanced downward at his hands, anticipating witnessing them clean and manicured. But they were the raw, bleeding hands of Leo Kolchak. He sought his reflection within the polished table, but the face that stared back was a terrifying composite, half his own, half the impostor's. He awoke with a gasp, his heart hammering. The dream had exposed his conflict starkly. He was ensnared between two realms, belonging to neither. He was lamenting a life of gilded emptiness while living a life of authentic suffering he could not embrace. The inversion had not merely interchanged his circumstances, it had placed his very soul on trial. It was compelling him to question everything he had been. Was the merciless CEO the genuine him? Or was the broken man acquiring empathy the person he was destined to become? He reached into his pocket and clasped the smooth, carved stone, the symbol. It was the singular entity that belonged entirely to him, a bridge between the man he was and the man he had become. He could not revert. He was beginning to realize that perhaps he should not desire to. But he could not remain here either, a spectre within another man's life, observing a child languish in a world of manufactured gratitude. He had to discover a third path. He had to ascertain the meaning behind the inversion. He regarded Maya, slumbering beside him, her face etched with apprehension even in slumber. He regarded Finn, curled into a small ball, his breathing shallow. His trepidation was no longer solely for himself. It was for them, and intertwined with that trepidation was a novel, terrifying and profound question that kept him awake until the shivering dawn. If he could somehow reverse this, if he could reclaim his old life, would he be condemning this woman and child back to a life of slow decay? What was the cost of his own salvation? The factory, formerly a symbol of his degradation, was gradually transforming into his proving ground. The daily drudgery, the physical exertion, was no longer merely a punishment. It was a crucible. Elias, or the man who was now Leo, commenced applying the forgotten faculties of his former existence to the predicaments of his new one. He was a problem solver by nature, a systems analyst. He had constructed an empire by identifying inefficiencies and exploiting them. Now his focus was not upon profit margins, but upon survival. He initiated observing the scrap line not as a river of torment, but as a data stream. He noticed the inefficient distribution of workers, the recurring choke points where the belt would jam, causing hazardous pile-ups. He perceived how Foreman Graves, a man who had ascended to his position through sycophantic loyalty to the new regime, mismanaged his team, his commands driven by petty cruelty rather than logic. Graves was a new noble, one of the formerly downtrodden who now wielded his minor authority like a king's scepter, proving that cruelty was not the exclusive domain of the born rich. An opportunity presented itself during a torrential downpour. Rain lashed against the factory's corrugated iron roof, and a leak that had been dripping for weeks finally burst, sending a cascade of water down onto a critical electrical junction box near the main conveyor. Sparks flew in a terrifying display, and the entire line shuddered to a halt with a deafening groan. Panic erupted. Workers scrambled back, fearing electrocution. Graves stood, shouting ineffectually, his face pallid with fear. In that instant of chaos, Elias's mind became unnervingly calm. He discerned the problem, the variables, the solution. The main power cutoff was on the far side of the factory, too distant to reach in time before the shorting junction box blew the entire sector's grid. But he recalled seeing a secondary local breaker panel near their station, a relic from an older system that everyone disregarded. "The panel!" he shouted above the din, his voice carrying the unfamiliar ring of command. "Beneath the west gantry. Sever the power there." Several workers stared at him, dumbfounded. He was merely Leo, the quiet one with the low gratitude score. But his certainty was magnetic. One man, an older worker named Ben, his face a roadmap of arduous years, hesitated for a second, and then nodded, scrambling towards the gantry. Meanwhile, a younger worker had slipped on the wet floor and fallen perilously close to the sparking, water-drenched junction box. He lay stunned, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Graves was screaming for everyone to remain back, his authority dissolving into hysterics. Elias did not hesitate. He seized a long, dry wooden plank utilized for prying open crates. He knew from his long-forgotten physics classes that wood was an insulator. "Remain still," he yelled at the fallen man. Just as Ben threw the breaker switch, plunging their section into a sudden, eerie silence, Elias reached the man. Employing the plank, he carefully pushed a heavy piece of scrap metal that had pinned the man's leg, liberating him. Other workers, their fear broken by his decisive action, rushed forward to assist in carrying the injured man to safety. In the aftermath, as the emergency crews arrived, Elias faded back into the crowd. But he had not gone unnoticed. Foreman Graves, his authority momentarily shattered, looked at him with a new expression, a venomous mixture of suspicion and resentment. He had been shown up, and by a lowly scrap sorter. Later, as they were cleaning up, the old worker, Ben, approached him. "Never witnessed that breaker used," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Saved us from a genuine disaster. Perhaps saved that kid's life. You think rapidly, Leo. You are not like the others." "Just got lucky," Elias mumbled, attempting to deflect the attention. Ben merely grunted, a knowing look in his eye. Before he turned to depart, he pressed something into Elias's hand. It was a folded, grimy piece of paper. Elias waited until he was alone before unfolding it. Upon it was a crudely drawn map of a back-alley intersection a few blocks away, and a time. Midnight. Beneath the map was a symbol, a spiral interwoven with a straight line. Elias's blood ran cold. It was the same symbol as the one on his stone. This was not a coincidence. Ben knew. He knew what the symbol signified. The old man was not just a factory worker. The decision to go was not a choice. It was a compulsion. This served as the first genuine indication, the inaugural thread he could grasp to unravel this ongoing nightmare. That evening, he tarried until both Maya and Finn were sound asleep. He observed the boy, whose cough appeared marginally less severe, a minor blessing. His actions at the factory had, paradoxically, augmented his gratitude rating for the day. The system was ludicrously straightforward. Avert a crisis, your productivity soars, and you receive a reward. He had thereby secured them a marginally elevated position on the clinic's waiting list. The notion was simultaneously gratifying and grotesque. He stole out of the tenement, his heart beating a frantic tattoo against his ribs. The district was even more menacing under the cloak of night. The shadows stretched deeper, the silence punctuated by distant sirens and the cries of unseen entities. He navigated the labyrinthine streets, guided by the rudimentary map. The designated rendezvous point was a dead-end alley behind a defunct butchery, the atmosphere still saturated with the spectral scent of aged blood. He waited, concealed within a doorway, every nerve ending alight. Was this a subterfuge? Was Graves attempting to eliminate him? Eventually, a figure materialized from the shadows. It was Ben. He was not unaccompanied. 2 additional figures, a man and a woman, flanked him. They were all clad in the same drab workers' attire, yet their eyes betrayed a difference. They were vigilant, keen, and devoid of the defeated weariness that plagued their counterparts. "You came," Ben stated, his voice shedding its folksy rumble and adopting a harder inflection. "We harbored doubts as to whether you would. The stone, you recognized the symbol." "It was mine," Elias responded, his voice taut. "From my previous existence. Before this." The 3 individuals exchanged a glance. "We refer to it as the mark of waking," the woman stated. Her name was Lena. "A select few of us possess them, relics from our former lives that somehow traversed the divide. A locket, a cufflink, in your case a stone. We remain uncertain as to the reason. Nevertheless, it serves as our means of identification." Elias's mind reeled. A select few of us. "You imply you all possess recollection? You are akin to me?" "We are the remnants," the third man, Kale, declared. He was younger, imbued with a fervent intensity in his eyes that verged on fanaticism. "We retain memories of the world that once existed. We were bankers, lawyers, artists, engineers. Now we are reduced to this." He gestured at his own grimy garments with disgust. "We remember the inversion." The relief that enveloped Elias was so profound that it nearly brought him to his knees. He was not insane. He was not isolated. For weeks he had existed as an island of sanity amidst a world of collective amnesia. Now he had discovered other castaways. "How many?" Elias inquired, his voice raspy with emotion. "We have located a dozen within this sector," Ben elucidated. "Perhaps a few hundred across the entire city. We must exercise caution. The new nobles are consumed by paranoia. They relentlessly pursue anyone exhibiting signs of malcontentment or ingratitude. They possess an awareness that something is amiss, yet they remain ignorant of its nature. Should they ascertain that some among us retain our memories?" He found it unnecessary to complete the sentence. This meeting constituted his initial trial, a test of his fortitude to emerge from the shadows. The incident at the factory served as the second, a test of his character, compelling him to utilize his former skills not for personal gain, but for the benefit of others. He had succeeded. He had discovered his path to this clandestine fraternity of the dispossessed. For the first time since awakening in this living hell, a fragile, perilous flicker of hope ignited within him. He was no longer merely a victim. He was a member of a resistance. However, as he stood there in the darkened alley, encircled by his fellow spectres, the hope was tinged with a novel and potent fear. Kyle, the intense young man, advanced closer, his eyes burning with a frigid fire. "Locating one another is merely the inception," Kyle whispered, his voice laced with a raw, desperate energy. "We do not believe this to be immutable. We believe it can be reversed. Nevertheless, it will necessitate a catalyst, a shock to the system, and we believe we know what or who that catalyst must be." He fixed his gaze directly upon Elias, his gaze piercing. "The man who usurped your life, the one they refer to as the benefactor, he is not the sole occupant of your penthouse. There is also the woman who usurped your wife's life. Tell us, Elias Vance, do you possess knowledge of your wife's whereabouts?" The question hung in the frigid, damp air of the alley, a blade pointed at the core of Elias's most vulnerable secret. His wife, Helena, or rather, the woman who now bore Helena's countenance and name, the woman he had observed on the news broadcast, the woman who had been Maya, his weary tenement wife, just weeks prior. Anya, that was her true name. He had overheard Maya, no, the real Maya, his current wife, mutter it in her sleep on one occasion, a name from a life she could not recall, Anya Rostova. "Her name is Anya," Elias stated, the words tasting like ash. She is, the wife of the man I've become." It was a dizzying, paradoxical statement, a snake devouring its own tail. Kyle nodded, a grim satisfaction etched upon his face. "We surmised as much. The inversion appears to possess a morbid sense of poetry. It did not merely exchange individuals, it exchanged counterparts. The chief executive officer for the factory worker, the wife for the wife." The remnants led Elias from the alley into the city's hidden arteries. Their base was not a singular location but a network of clandestine spaces. A forgotten cellar beneath a bakery, a sealed-off service tunnel within the transit system, a high-up room in a derelict clock tower. Here, within these pockets of oblivion, the dispossessed elite of the old world congregated. Elias encountered a former surgeon who now cleaned sewers, a celebrated novelist who now packed nutrient paste into tubes, and a brilliant physicist who now repaired rusted machinery. They were all specters, haunted by the lives they had forfeited, and united by the impossible truth they bore. It was within the clock tower, with the city's grim panorama spread below, that Ben and Lena elucidated the full, terrifying scope of their discoveries. The great inversion, as we term it, was not a localized event, Lena explained, her voice low and precise. She was a former data scientist, and she had meticulously pieced together their new reality with fragments of information. It was global, instantaneous. At 3:33 a.m. Universal Time, every human being with a net worth exceeding 10 million credits swapped consciousness with a randomly selected individual from the bottom economic quintile. Elias felt a wave of vertigo. It was not exclusive to him. It encompassed his entire class, his friends, his rivals, his partners, all of them, awakening in slums and favelas and desolate farmlands across the globe, and all of the people they had once flown over, driven past and ignored were now occupying their boardrooms, sleeping in their beds. But why? Elias inquired, the question that had tormented him for weeks. An act of providence? An extraterrestrial experiment? A revolution? "We do not believe it was an act of man," Ben stated, his gaze distant. "There existed no technology, no warning. It was metaphysical. Some among us believe it was a balancing, The universe, akin to any complex system, seeking equilibrium. The scales of wealth and poverty became so unbalanced that the system simply snapped. A hard reset. Kael scoffed at this. Equilibrium? This is not balance, it is a farce. They have committed the same errors we did, merely at an accelerated pace. They espouse empathy while constructing a surveillance state. They speak of gratitude while their children succumb to illness from the same smog. They are evolving into us, merely with less style. His bitterness was a palpable force within the room. The most startling revelation was yet to come. The inversion lacks stability, Lena continued, her voice diminishing to a whisper. The new reality is tenuous. We have all experienced it. We refer to them as flickers. She described moments of temporal and spatial dissonance. A remnant would traverse a grimy alley and for a split second perceive the manicured hedge of their former garden. Another would taste the bland nutrient paste and, for a fleeting instant, savor the rich flavor of a steak they had consumed a year prior. Elias contemplated the stone within his pocket. A permanent flicker, a fragment of the old world that had somehow become lodged within the new. These flickers are becoming more frequent, more intense, Lena stated. Our physicist Aris possesses a theory. He believes the two realities, the old and the new, remain entangled. They are vibrating at disparate frequencies, yet occasionally they align. The flickers are the moments of near alignment. Aris believes a total alignment is inevitable. A moment when the veil will be at its thinnest. He terms it the convergence. The convergence. The word hung suspended in the air, laden with a terrifying promise. A chance to what? Elias inquired, his heart pounding. To revert? A chance to instigate a reversal, Kyle interjected, his eyes blazing. If, during the peak of the convergence, we can engender a sufficiently potent paradox, a shock to the metaphysical system, Aris believes we can trigger a snapback. We can restore the world to its rightful state. The room fell silent. The sheer audacity of the concept was breathtaking. To not merely survive, but to reverse the apocalypse, to reclaim their stolen lives. And how do we engender this shock? Elias inquired, already dreading the response. Kyle's gaze remained unwavering. The system is constructed around figureheads, symbols. The new Elias Vance, the benefactor, is the ultimate symbol of this new world, and his wife Anya is its heart. She is the former poor, now experiencing the ultimate dream. She represents the hope of this new order. Should she, the poster child for the inversion, publicly reject it, to demand the return of the old world? Should she be persuaded to assist us, to become the key? Elias felt a cold dread wash over him. They desired him to contact Anya, the woman who was cohabitating with his son, Julian, or the boy who was now Julian, the woman who had been granted a paradise she never solicited. They desired him to implore her to incinerate that paradise for his sake. She will not do it, Elias stated flatly. Why would she? She has escaped hell. Her son is safe, healthy. Do you expect me to implore her to relinquish that? To regress to this? He indicated with a sweeping gesture the grimy window and the world of smoke and hardship sprawled below. You must compel her to understand, Kyle insisted, his voice escalating in volume. You are uniquely positioned to do so. You share a profound connection with her. You were her husband in this existence, just as you were Helena's in the previous one. Surely she retains some vestige of memory, some faint echo of the man with whom she shared her life, the father of her child. The very notion felt grotesque. To exploit the spectral memory of Leo Kolchak, a man he had effectively extinguished, as a tool to manipulate the woman who had supplanted his wife. It presented a moral labyrinth from which he could discern no escape. Yet the image of his own son, Julian, his features blurring in his recollection, wrestled with his hesitation. What manner of existence was Julian currently enduring? Was he confined to a tenement akin to this one, coughing in the oppressive darkness? The mere thought was unbearable. Several days hence, a secret was unveiled that galvanized his determination. Aris, the physicist, had been diligently working on a device, not a contrivance to facilitate communication with the past, but rather one to detect the flickers. It consisted of a chaotic assemblage of wires and salvaged components, yet it functioned. During a particularly potent flicker, the device emitted a high-pitched whine, and for a terrifying duration of 3 seconds, the vista from the clock tower underwent a radical transformation. The smog-laden industrial hellscape dissipated, supplanted by the resplendent, pristine skyline of the old world. Elias beheld Vance Tower, his tower, gleaming in the untainted air. It appeared so proximate, so tangibly real, that he felt he could extend his hand and touch it. Then, with the same abruptness with which it had materialized, it vanished, leaving behind only the grime and the pervasive gray. The vision shattered something fundamental within him. The hope was no longer an abstract concept. It possessed tangible reality. He had glimpsed his home. That very night he devised a means. The remnants possessed a contact, a disaffected communications technician ensconced within the city's central hub, who owed one of them a debt from their prior lives. For a stipulated price, this individual could patch a solitary, untraceable audio call through to a private number. The designated number for the penthouse suite within Vance Tower. His hand trembled noticeably as he grasped the makeshift communication device. He was poised to converse with the woman currently inhabiting his wife's life, sleeping within his bed, and raising another man's offspring as if it were his own. He was about to request that she assist him in demolishing her own happiness. The remnants stood arrayed around him, their countenances taut with anticipation. This represented the initial gambit in their seemingly insurmountable war. He issued the signal. The line connected. It emitted a single ring, then a second. Subsequently, a voice responded. A voice he recognized from news broadcasts, yet a voice that also resonated with the faint, recollected weariness of Maya. "Hello?" she inquired, her tone exhibiting caution. Elias inhaled deeply, the air within the cellar thick with the aroma of dust and desperate hope. "Anya," he uttered, the name sounding both foreign and intimately familiar on his tongue. "My name is Elias Vance. I believe you are currently residing in my home." A protracted, profound silence descended on the opposite end of the line. For a fleeting moment he surmised that she had terminated the connection. However, a soft, terrified whisper emanated from the receiver, a whisper that validated everything. "Leo, is that you?" The world contained within the Vance Tower penthouse constituted a universe of silk and tranquility. Anya Rostova, now known to the world as Helena Vance, traversed its expansive, sun-drenched chambers like a wary spectre. Weeks had elapsed since the great inversion, yet the splendor still felt borrowed, ephemeral, akin to a stage set susceptible to imminent dismantling. She would glide her hand along the cool, smooth marble of a countertop, or gaze at the improbable panorama of the city from the floor-to-ceiling windows, and a wave of profound dislocation would engulf her. This was not her life, but it was her son's. That singular thought served as her anchor, the one to which she tenaciously clung in the dead of night when the memories of her former existence, the cold, the hunger, the gnawing fear, threatened to overwhelm her. Her son, Finn, now addressed as Julian, was flourishing. The persistent, rattling cough that had served as the soundtrack to her anxieties had dissipated in the clean, filtered air of the penthouse. He consumed fresh fruit, slept in a warm, soft bed, and was attended by physicians who spoke in gentle, reassuring tones. He was secure. For a mother who had known naught but the constant spectre of his fragility, this security represented a form of salvation so absolute that it verged on the divine. The man who now served as her husband, the man whom the world perceived as Elias Vance, remained a stranger. He possessed the physical form of a man she had never previously encountered, inhabited by the soul of a man she scarcely knew, a dock worker named Dmitri who had resided 2 floors beneath her in the tenement. He was kind, albeit in a bewildered, clumsy manner. He too was haunted by the swap, yet he adapted with a simple, pragmatic acceptance. "We won the lottery, Anya," he would declare, his eyes wide with a perpetual sense of awe. "Our present duty is not to question it. Our duty is to avoid jeopardizing it." He threw himself wholeheartedly into the role of the benevolent CEO, launching the empathy mandate with the fervor of a true believer. He retained vivid memories of the struggle, and he genuinely desired to ameliorate conditions. However, Anya discerned the subtle alterations that power was already enacting upon him. The impatience directed towards servants, the fleeting annoyance at logistical impediments, the facile assumption that his pronouncements would be met with immediate acquiescence. The decay of privilege manifested as a subtle, creeping mold. Anya's own undertaking was of a more personal nature. She channeled the vast resources now at her disposal into the construction of state-of-the-art pediatric clinics within the lower sectors. She possessed precise knowledge of what was requisite: air filtration units, respiratory specialists, unrestricted access to medication. She combated the nascent bureaucracy, which was already exhibiting the same sclerotic tendencies as its predecessor, circumventing committees and the nonsensical, gratitude-based resource allocation. She was attempting to assuage a guilt that felt as boundless as the sky visible from her window. She was striving to prove